Welcome to the People's Maps Commission virtual public hearing for the 5th Congressional District. The hearing will now begin. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. This evening's hearing will include testimony from 2 subject matter experts who were personally involved in the redistricting process of 2011, but in different ways. Keith Gaddy, a professor at the University of Oklahoma, and Kent Mayer, a professor at UW-Madison. Following the presentations, commission members will have an opportunity to have a short period of Q&A with some of the presenters. Finally, beginning at approximately 7:30 p.m., the public testimony portion of the meeting will begin. As a reminder, due to the unfortunate increasing spread of COVID-19, this is a virtual hearing with many participants from around the state and nation, and technology can be fickle even under the best of circumstances. We appreciate in advance the patience and understanding of viewers as well as presenters and commission members should there be any technical challenges this evening. With that, I'll now hand it over to Commissioner Chair Christopher Ford to call the hearing to order.
Thank you, Molly. Good evening. I would like to call the second hearing of the People's Maps Commission to order. As a reminder, because we're not voting on any issues or any matters this evening, we don't need a quorum. But we'll go ahead and get started. So when I say your name, if you could, please say present. Starting in our 1st Congressional District, Commissioner Tobias from the 1st Congressional District.
Present.
Commissioner Anthony from the 2nd Congressional District.
Present.
Commissioner McClellan from the 3rd Congressional District.
Present.
Commissioner Rangel from the 4th Congressional District.
Present.
Commissioner Ram from the 5th Congressional District.
Present.
Commissioner Prentice from the 6th Congressional District.
Present.
Commissioner Bissonnette from the 7th Congressional District.
Present.
And Commissioner Phillips from the 8th Congressional District.
Present.
Thank you. Before we begin tonight's hearing, I want to make sure that all the citizens of the 5th Congressional District, where we're holding a virtual meeting tonight, are able to get to know the commission members a little bit better. And so I offer the opportunity for our commission members to offer some few introductory remarks before we get started. And so just starting again from the very top, so Commissioner Tobias from the 1st Congressional District.
Yep. Hi, thank you, Chair Ford, and good evening, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Tobias. I represent the 1st Congressional District. I live in the city of Racine and work for the Racine Unified School District as an executive assistant, supporting the superintendent and Board of Education. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Tobias. From the 2nd Congressional District, Commissioner Anthony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everyone. I'm Ruben Anthony. I'm the president and CEO of the Urban League of Greater Madison. I'm representing the 2nd Congressional District, and I'm looking forward to hearing the speakers tonight, and I'm looking forward to a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Anthony. Commissioner McClellan from the 3rd Congressional District.
Yeah, hi, good evening. I'm Anne Marie McClellan from the 3rd CD. I live in Menominee, Wisconsin. I'm recently retired, but prior to retirement, I spent the last 25 years working to organize and conduct clinical trials, research trials in the area of cancer research, looking for new therapies for cancer.
Awesome. Thank you, Commissioner McClellan. From the 4th Congressional District, Commissioner Rangel.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Ford. My name is Benjamin Rangel, representing the 4th Congressional District from Bayview in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Grew up in Racine, went to school at UW-Madison for undergrad, and currently am a government high school teacher. Really excited to hear from our experts, but particularly excited to hear from you all, the public, and I really enjoyed last hearing from the public and knowing that Wisconsinites are really passionate about redistricting and making sure we have fair maps. So really looking forward to hearing that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Commissioner Ram from the 5th Congressional District.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Susan Ranft. I live in Wauwatosa, and I'm a Vice President of Human Resources with Manpower Group in Milwaukee. Like Ben mentioned, we have really appreciated so far learning from our fellow citizens and the experts, and we look forward to that tonight. And we recognize we have a long way to go, and we appreciate all of your expertise.
Thank you, Commissioner Ram. From the 6th Congressional District, Commissioner Prentice.
Thank you, Chair Ford, and good evening, everyone. I'm Melissa Prentice, Commissioner for the 6th Congressional District. I live and work in the city of Sheboygan. I'm a librarian and the Public Services Manager at Mead Public Library in Sheboygan, and I'm very happy to be serving the 6th District and the state of Wisconsin as part of this commission.
Thank you, Commissioner Prentice. From the 7th Congressional District, Commissioner Bissonnette.
And good evening. My name is Jason Bissonnette. I am the Dean of Students for the Lucoutere Ojibwe Tribal K-12 School, and I also sit on the Board of Regents for the Lucoutere Ojibwe College. So like everyone else had mentioned, I'm absolutely honored to be a part of this, and I look forward to this evening's expert witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Phillips from the 8th Congressional District.
Thank you. I'm a recently retired cancer physician from Appleton. I just want to use my time to give a quick shout out to Rich and Lena Eam, who live in the 5th Congressional District, specifically New Berlin. Rich and Lena have been very active for 2 years in these areas of ranked choice voting, nonpartisan redistricting, and have mentored several dozen Wisconsinites in this activism, including myself. So thank you. They're conservatives politically, and being conservatives also are good role models for the whole state, demonstrating again that this desire for openness, transparency, nonpartisan redistricting is shared by the majority of Wisconsin people on all sides of the political spectrum. So thank you, Rich and Lena, and thank you, Chair Ford.
Thank you. And I'm Commissioner and also Chairman Ford from the 4th Congressional District as well, out of Whitefish Bay. I'm an emergency medicine physician, as well as an advisor for the Emergency Medicine Services for Children. And so look forward to hearing from our guest speakers tonight, as well as hearing from the people of Wisconsin a little bit later on. So, and I hope all of you from the 5th District are really seeing that we are all a diverse group here. We're all normal Wisconsinites. We come from various backgrounds and we hold various jobs. We even share various differing political beliefs. But we do all have one thing in common, as Commissioner Phillips was saying. We all have a desire to have a fair map created. And we believe that if we work together with you, as well as hearing testimony from our speakers, that we'll get towards that goal of creating a fair map. So now I want to take a little bit of time and talk about the 5th District itself. And so for that, Commissioner Ramp is going to provide a short overview of the congressional district that she represents, which is hosting us tonight. So we hope that to learn a lot more from Commissioner Ramp, and we'll all take a seat back here and take a listen. So Commissioner Ramp.
Great. Thank you, Chair Ford. And thank you to my fellow commission members for joining me virtually this evening in the Wisconsin's 5th Congressional District. For those of you who are not familiar with my district, I'll share a few facts. As of the last census, we have over 700,000 residents. It presently covers all of Washington and Jefferson counties, most of Waukesha County, and portions of Dodge, Milwaukee, and Walworth counties. That means that our district not only covers many highly populated suburban areas surrounding Milwaukee, such as Brookfield, New Berlin, Germantown, and Elm Grove, but it also includes more rural communities such as Iron Ridge, Reeseville, and Juneau. From a personal perspective, I've spent most of my life in the 5th Congressional. I grew up in West Bend, and I've been living with my family in Wauwatosa for the last 17 years. And I know the residents of the 5th Congressional District are passionate about fair maps, and I look forward to hearing from some of our constituents this evening in the public testimony portion of our meeting. Chair Ford.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Ramp. So learning from past practices, mistakes, and/or best practices, it's often a foundational part of any complex process, and this process of redistricting is honestly no different. That's why it's important as a commission that we learn more about how the legislative maps were drawn before in the past, and also during the 2011 redistricting process. Tonight, we're lucky to have a presentation from two individuals who personally participated in the 2011 process. First up, we'll have Keith Gaddy. He's currently a voting rights and redistricting expert and is also a professor at the University of Oklahoma. In 2011, Keith was the Voting Rights and Data Consultant Counsel for the legislative majority who set our current district boundaries. We also have Kenneth Mayer, who is currently a political science professor at UW-Madison, but was also an expert witness for plaintiffs in the 2012 Wisconsin voting rights redistricting trial, and also the 2015 challenging gerrymandering in Wisconsin. Keith and Kenneth, thank you so much for joining us this evening and providing us a look back at the 2011 redistricting efforts.
So thank you. It's a privilege to talk to you and also a pleasure to give you some information with Keith, who, in addition to being a colleague who I have great respect for, is also a good friend. As you said, I've been here at the University of Wisconsin since 1989 and was an expert witness for groups challenging the map in 2011, 2012, in particular, the voting rights challenge to the districts 8 and 9 in the southern portion of the city of Milwaukee. I also was an expert witness for the plaintiffs in the 2015 Gill versus Whitford case. And Keith and I have also worked on other cases, and I'll let him introduce himself. We do have a presentation that will fire up when we're ready to get started, and we look forward to talking with you and answering questions that you have about what happened in 2011 and 2012.
Excellent. And let me echo the sentiment of my friend and colleague, Ken Mayer, who it's been my pleasure over the years to both work with, work against, and get to know Ken. And it's very nice to be working in collaboration now. I first worked in Wisconsin in 2002, being retained in litigation by the Assembly Republicans, the majority in the House and the Senate minority, and then was retained again in 2010 by counsel for the Assembly Republicans, and then subsequently for the Assembly as the majority for the 2011-12 redistricting round. Most of my work was either in data orientation, data organization, or in evaluating the voting rights performance of districts at that time, but my full scope of participation is well documented in subsequent litigation based upon my testimony as a lay witness in the Gill district level trial. I left this industry in 2014. I'm actually now a professor of architecture and journalism at University of Oklahoma. But in 2017, interceded with my colleague Bernie Groffman in drafting an amicus brief to the Supreme Court, articulating a test for detecting partisan gerrymanders and articulating the argument for why they were justiciable. And part of our presentation this evening, and the commission has been provided with this amicus brief, falls back on those three basic components of detecting a gerrymander. And Ken and I believe we agreed upon these three prongs, but also on the need of the commission to be cognizant of it, not necessarily as something to follow, but as a back test in looking at any redistricting product that arises from any institution. Ken, should we jump into it?
Sure. Molly, can we fire up the presentation? So Keith and I are going to trade off. We haven't exactly worked out exactly who's going to say what, so it's going to be a conversation between us and with you. This lays out who we are and our familiarity with the subject, and we very deliberately describe this as the problem of gerrymandering. And what we would like to walk through is some of the reasons why partisan gerrymandering is a problem and is inconsistent with key principles of democratic legitimacy, fairness, and responsiveness. Then we have a little bit of work stemming from some work that Keith has done about one of the key components of evaluating a gerrymander. And then we'll walk through some principles and then some examples from the 2012 plan of how the gerrymander, the partisan gerrymander was achieved. I can say that all of the factual statements that we are making come not from our positions as sort of observers of this, but they stem from the decision of the 3-judge panel, the district court, which concluded that the 2012 plan was an unconstitutional gerrymander that discriminated against voters and citizens based on their partisanship, which violated the First Amendment associational rights. So Molly, can we move to the next slide, and I'll kick it over to Keith.
Thank you. So the thing we have to remember is we have to remember what we're talking about. Gerrymandering is the act of crafting legislative boundaries for political advantage. So you've got a political motive and you alter the boundaries in an effort to gain political advantage. Partisan gerrymandering in particular undermines two major assumptions of democracy. And these are very important. And Ken and I are both American government textbook authors. And if you look in our initial chapters where we talk about democracy, we'll talk about the need for good democratic systems to have majoritarianism and responsiveness. What does that mean? That means, put simply, that who gets the majority of votes, that should translate into political power. That if you get the majority of votes, you should get the majority of seats. If you get the majority of votes in contesting a particular office, the majority vote winner should prevail. Okay, a very straightforward proposition. Then there's responsiveness, which means that if there's a change in the majority in terms of who's getting the majority of seats, that there's a majority of votes, that should in turn lead to a change in who holds the majority of seats. In addition, as a vote share increases or decreases, we should see corresponding changes in seats held. There's a caveat to be put to responsiveness, though. This is not a one-to-one proposition, which is that we don't necessarily expect 55% of the vote to lead to 55% of the seats when we use a single member district system. I will not get into the detail of that now, but there's always going to be a little bit of flux and error, and a party getting the majority of votes will often get what we call a small seat bonus. Now, the consequential impact of partisan gerrymandering is that it can defy one or both of these assumptions of democracy, and it's most dangerous when it undermines both. But what it also does in the process is it disfranchises people based upon their identity and based upon their geography. And one thing that I've contended is, in terms of identity, it's not just that if you have partisans on one side or the other, that if a party is a partisan majority and they're denied their opportunity at a representative majority, not only are they injured, but also those swing voters who may move the majority back and forth have also been disfranchised in the process. So the concept, the ability to shift and change and to have your change in preference recognized is undermined and defied by partisan gerrymandering. In addition, this gerrymandering often leads to individuals who lead in certain geographies to be consistently excluded from participating in majority government, even if they're part of a popular majority. Now, one thing that our research shows is that you need institutional and process solutions to defeat gerrymandering. You can have great principles, the process solution, but if you don't have institutions in place that are going to pay heed to democracy and defend it, it's much easier to gerrymander. Let's have the next slide. Okay, so briefly, if you're looking for a fair electoral system, what you're going to see are three elements: symmetry, majoritarianism, and responsiveness. I briefly described these in the previous, discussing the previous slide, but this fleshes out some detail. Symmetry means that if one party gets 60% of the seats with 55% of the vote, you should expect the other party to have the same opportunity, that votes and seats will accord to either party in the majority in roughly the same proportions. You have the same kind of symmetry, the same kind, the same translation of votes into seats. It will be majoritarian in that when a majority of voters express a clear preference for another party by giving it a majority, that party should get the majority control of the legislature. And finally, when voters change their preferences, responsiveness, the majority should change. Gerrymandering will violate all of these normative principles. And this not only defies the ability of the majority to get elected, it also undermines confidence in institutions. And in this era, I think we can all agree that's a critical concern. Next slide, please. Kenneth, do you want to talk about this one, or do you want me to take it?
Why don't you take it, since it's your graph?
Okay, yes. Okay, so these are a set of graphs for the seats, votes, responsiveness in Wisconsin for 2012, 14, and 16 under the new assembly map. Under a perfectly responsive map, you would, under a fair map, one thing you would expect is that at 50% of the vote, the legislature should split 50% of the seats for one party or the other, or as close as possible. So you would expect the line to pass through the 50-50 mark, the crosshair of this graphic. The second thing that you would expect to see is that there will be a small bonus of seats for one party or the other from 50 to 55%, where they kind of outperform the percentage, and then it will start to flatten out. So what you would expect to see is basically an S curve that starts down in the lower left corner of the graphic as you look at it. It proceeds on a curve up to the 50-50 line, follows a somewhat steep trajectory, and then falls off and then flattens. Okay. What's happening here is the curve that we would expect to see has shifted 5 points to the advantage of the GOP in terms of translating votes into seats, which is that according to this curve, at 45% of the vote, Republicans should get a majority of the seats. At 50%, they're going to get 60%. At 55%, they get roughly 70%. So what we're seeing going on in this map is a great deal of skew that's been introduced to the map. The map's responsive, but it's not majoritarian. Okay, it responds to changes in vote preferences, but it doesn't respond in a manner that allows both parties symmetry, the equal opportunity to elect a majority of seats based upon having the same share of the votes as a majority. Let's go to the next slide.
Actually, can we hold off on there's one point I would like to make on the
let's go back.
Slide, which is that what this shows, if you look at the blue lines, which reflect the number of seats that the Democrats would be expected to win at a given percentage of the vote, it shows that Democrats would need to win over 55% of the vote in order to obtain a majority of seats. And when you observe what happened in 2012, 2020, 2014, and 2016, in some years, the statewide vote for Democrats, as measured by votes for statewide office, either president or governor, there were years when the Democrats achieved a majority of the vote in 2012. There were years when the Democrats did not achieve a majority of the statewide votes, as in 2016. But the Democrats would have to basically get a share of the statewide vote that would be unprecedented, going back in Wisconsin political history to the 1980s or before. And to give an indicator from 2018, what the effect of this map was. In 2018, there were 5 statewide offices on the ballot: governor, secretary of state, attorney general, treasurer, and U.S. senator. Democratic candidates won all 5 of these races with a share of the votes that ranged between just a little bit over 50% up to about 57% for the Senate candidate. And the number of seats that Democratic candidates controlled in the assembly basically did not change at all. I think there was a 1 seat change. And this reflects one of the points that was made in the litigation in 2015 about how durable the gerrymander enacted in 2012 was, that it essentially protects the Republican majority in the Senate or in the assembly under any plausible statewide vote that Democratic candidates might achieve, or what the preferences would be of voters. And this is why the Wisconsin gerrymander in 2012 is regarded as one of the most extreme in American history. So we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, the only other comparable to this would have been the Georgia gerrymander in 2001, which oddly enough was thrown out by a federal court and was sustained, but it was on one person a basis rather than partisan gerrymandering basis. This is one of the most effective maps I've ever seen in terms of locking in an impediment to a majority emerging.
So I can talk a little bit about this and what happened in 2012. There are two complementary strategies that are used to gerrymander, and they both stem from the fact that in a single member district, in Wisconsin, where it's the first past the post, so the candidate who receives the most votes wins the district. It doesn't matter if you win the seat by one vote or if you win the seat by all of the votes, you still get the seat. And so that provides opportunities to introduce a bias into how those votes are aggregated into seats. There are two ways that this is done. The first is called packing, when the party doing the gerrymandering takes voters from the other party and packs them into a small number of districts where they have overwhelming majority. So often the packing will be to the extent that the districts will be uncontested. So in a district where Democrats are packed, the Republicans frequently will not even run a candidate because there's no point. And that concentrates disfavored voters into a small number of districts. The complement of this is cracking, where you take constituencies or geographies where the disfavored party, in this case, the Democrats, actually would comprise a majority, but you split them up so that instead of having a district where Democrats constitute, say, hypothetically or just notionally, 60% of the voters, you split those into two districts where the Democrats comprise 30% of each. And so that allows the gerrymandering party to more efficiently translate votes into seats. And the record of the Whitford trial, we're leaving aside the voting rights issues because that presents a different set of concerns. This happened all over the state. And in the next three slides, we have some examples, two from smaller cities or smaller municipalities, and then we have a set of examples from Milwaukee County and the districts around Milwaukee County that show pretty clearly how this was done. So can we go to the next slide? This is in the 6th congressional district. We're focusing on the assembly because that's where there are the most opportunities to do this. The shadings in this map reflect an estimate of the underlying partisanship of an area based on a combination of votes over a series of years for statewide offices. Areas that are shaded in red are areas that are Republican, and the darker the color, the more heavily Republican the area is. Areas that are shaded in blue, conversely, are Democratic areas, and again, the intensity or the strength of the Democratic support is reflected in the intensity of the shading. These two cities are the cities of Manitowoc and Two Rivers, which have typically been kept together. They constitute what would generally be regarded as a community of interest, voters or a region that has similar economic interests. It is a Democratic area, as many of the cities in Wisconsin are. And you can see that the cities of Manitowoc and Two Rivers are split right down the middle between two assembly districts. Manitowoc has a population, 2010 census population of about 34,000, and it's marginally Democratic. It's about 52%. It was certainly possible to place this entire both of these cities into a single district, because the ideal population of an assembly district was a little over 57,000 in after the 2010 census. So this is just a classic example of cracking, in which in this case, a Democratic area consisting of two cities and some of the areas in between were split up into two districts and merged with larger populations of Republican voters to deliver two safe Republican districts instead of a likely Democratic district, or certainly a competitive district. Keith, do you have any observations about this?
Well, I'd say, Ken, let's keep going and kind of loop around at the end. But the thing to remember is that any districting choice is, in a sense of, here's the thing I would remember. Community of interest matter, but community of interest is a very difficult concept to deal with sometimes, because, as our colleague Bruce Kane at Berkeley says, community interest is in the eye of the beholder, that almost anything can be defined as a community of interest. So one thing you may think about is, as you go about your business, is finding ways for communities of interest to come forward and identify themselves and present themselves and make themselves known. And history and ritual and habit will help define communities of interest. But oftentimes people attempt to muddy the waters of community of interest by introducing too many different conceptualizations of it just to justify crafting the district they want. But geographic and economic interests are powerful communities of interest. Indeed, there are special protections for racial, ethnic, and First Nation groups, which can be considered communities of interest, but are much more under voting rights law and have additional protections and consideration by you in this process. So take care in engaging community of interest to make sure that they are powerful and well-defined concepts of the sort that Professor Mayer has introduced already.
So excellent, good points. So let's go to the next slide. So this is a portion of Milwaukee County on the right, with the Ozaukee County to the north, Washington County to the northwest, and Waukesha County to the west. It shows, as is common in understanding Wisconsin's political geography, that Milwaukee is the largest and one of the most democratic regions of the state, mostly in the city of Milwaukee, but not entirely, surrounded by the collar counties, Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington, which are three of the, if not the three most Republican areas in the state. Again, blue, Democratic, red, Republican. And you can see throughout this map, the point to make in this map is not just what happened within the city of Milwaukee, because a number of these districts, particularly in the north central and northwest part of the city, are majority minority African American districts that are essentially required under the Voting Rights Act. But outside of that, if you look at the districts that surround Milwaukee County and Ozaukee, Washington, and Waukesha, you see all of the districts have little fingers and little jogs that reach into Milwaukee County and pick up Democratic areas of the county, again submerging these Democratic areas of Milwaukee County into much larger populations of Republican voters, taking what would easily be a Democratic district and turning it into a number of Republican districts. So just for example, if you look at the 23rd district, which extends just below where it says Ozaukee County on the Lake Michigan shoreline, and that little finger comes down into Milwaukee County through the northern lakeshore suburbs. That area in District 23 in Milwaukee County is a strongly Democratic area that contains about 25,000 people. So that's about a little less than half the population of an assembly district. But those voters are submerged into or merged into a district that has even more strongly Republican voters in the rest of the 23rd district, which render it a safe Republican district. Similarly, in the 24th, you see the 24th is almost entirely in, actually, the 24th district contains pieces of Milwaukee, Ozaukee, Washington, and Waukesha County. But the area in the 24th district in Milwaukee County is a 60% Democratic area, but it was submerged into an area of heavily Republican voters that was essentially twice as large. And we can see the same thing in the 22nd district, which again extends from Milwaukee County into Waukesha County and up into Washington County. That little area, that vertical strip in Milwaukee County, again, is an overwhelmingly Democratic area. But there were only about 7,000 voters or 7,000 people in that area. So those Democratic voters are submerged into a district with a much larger population of Republican voters. And so they are cracked. You see the same thing in the 13th, 14th, and 15th district, which extend horizontally from Waukesha County into Milwaukee County, taking large Republican areas and extending into Milwaukee County to pick up Democratic areas. They're essentially cracking those Democratic voters. One thing we can say, if you look at the areas of Milwaukee County that are contained in the 13th, 14th, and 15th district, there's over 100,000 people in those areas. So you could create not just one assembly district, but almost two, probably 1 2/3 of an assembly district. So ultimately, you look in this area alone, probably cost the Democrats at least 3 districts and perhaps more. I've got one more slide, one more example of showing examples of cracking. So can we go to the next slide?
Before we go back to that one real quick.
Sure.
There's everything that Ken has just described is also happening in the Senate for the very same reason. Because Wisconsin uses a pod mechanism of crafting the assembly, which is a Senate district with 3 assembly districts directly underneath. Districts 13, 14, and 15, which are exhibiting these effects in the assembly, have the same impact on the Senate seat that sits above that district, okay, above these 3 districts. And so it's very important to remember that even though the Senate seats will look more reasonable, more well-rounded, they're often going to have the same effects at work underneath because of the structure of the pod. I just wanted to make sure we got that on the table real quick.
Right. So yeah, in Wisconsin, that each Senate district is made up of 3 assembly districts, and so the 13th, 14th, and 15th assembly districts together make the 5th Senate district, and the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th assembly district make the. I always have to do this in my head. You divide the highest number by 3, so that's the 8th assembly district. So this, again, this structure by itself cost the Democrats at least 1 Senate district, possibly 2, which makes a difference in part because the Senate, the distribution of Senate majorities generally will be a little bit closer than the distribution of partisan majorities in the Assembly. So that is important to keep in mind. So let's go to the next slide. This is also in the 6th district, and this is the city of Sheboygan, which is again split between 2 districts. The city of Sheboygan has a total population of a little over 49,000 people, so it's almost big enough to form a complete assembly district under traditional redistricting principles, which is supposed to show respect for local political subdivisions and municipal boundaries. It was not necessary to split the city, and by splitting the city, it took what would have been, so you have the city of Sheboygan, which is a fairly strongly Democratic area. You would have had to add probably another 8,000 voters in the surrounding area, which would have created a district of 57,000. It would have almost certainly have been a Democratic district. By splitting that into 2 areas, one with 32,000 in the south, another with about 17,000 in the north, it turned one Democratic district into 2 Republican districts. And this happened all over the state. Some of the examples are a little bit more difficult to show graphically because the districts have a wider geographic spread, but there are still examples of packing and cracking. One of the well, we'll just focus on these examples. We can talk about some others if you have questions about it. And we have one more slide talking about principles to keep in mind, and I'll leave this to Keith.
All righty. You're going to be introduced to a lot of different redistricting principles in this process. The one thing that is necessary is the equalization of population, but you'll hear about different measures of compactness, which have to do with the regularity of shape of the district. County splits, city splits, township splits. We've introduced communities of interest, competitiveness, responsiveness. So many different criterion can be brought to the table, but they're also in competition, which is, for example, it may be that the most responsive map is not the most compact map, or it may be that the map that offers the most compactness ends up splitting cities or townships or villages. It may be the case that in attempting to preserve communities of interest, you defy a variety of other principles. And the other thing is you run into some natural influences of geography, which is that you have, for example, you have a concentration of African-American and Hispanic voters in Milwaukee, and you have Voting Rights Act Section 2 obligations to ensure equal opportunity to elect districts in those communities in order to
It looks like Keith, we had a little technical snag there until he comes
end up
back.
hacking in Democratic voters and create a Republican skew in the
Keith,
map.
you kind of froze for about 30 seconds.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'll tell you what I'm going to do is, am I good now?
Yeah.
Okay. What I was saying, I was basically going into voting rights obligations, and you need to craft equal opportunity to elect districts in Milwaukee County. And in crafting those districts, you're going to be packing in Democratic voters. It's as simple as that. The question is, how can you satisfy Voting Rights Act requirements without needlessly packing in Democratic voters? One thing we know from research is that Democratic voters often, white Democratic voters close in to majority minority communities are often also Democrats, especially in the Midwest and in the Northeast and on the West Coast. So in crafting majority minority districts, you're necessarily going to introduce some skew in the map that will naturally tend towards a Republican advantage. But that doesn't preclude the map from being responsive and otherwise symmetric. Okay, it's worth noting those things. It's possible to draw a responsive symmetric map and also satisfy the Voting Rights Act. But this is the main thing you have to remember is you've got, I'd say principles are important, but the key, as we've noted at the bottom of the slide, is to identify the key values that you wish to pursue and then to be transparent, okay? A public process, sunshine is always the best antiseptic, right? A process performed in public with public access, eyeballs on the process. We saw this when North Carolina recrafted their maps after they were thrown out a couple of years ago. A process that was literally on camera was able to preclude legislators from engaging in additional gerrymandering activity in the process of creating a map to satisfy the Supreme Court. So transparency, visibility, accessibility are every bit as important as any particular redistricting principle you might pick, like compactness, okay? You're not going to get a perfect map, get a good map. Don't let the pursuit of perfection become the enemy of what is good enough to allow for responsiveness and symmetry. But also follow your judgment. Follow your judgment. Don't be overwhelmed with the math. The math behind this doesn't have to be that complex and that involved. Is a majority of votes leading to a majority of seats? Will the analysis show that if the majority shifts, the seats should shift, right? If you ensure that you're simply relying on math that's accessible and understandable, and you combine that with judgment, you can craft fair maps. And then finally, there's the biggest problem, which is you have a gerrymander. It should be undone. I'm of the opinion the court should have undone it. Undoing the map and reversing it can result in a gerrymander that goes in the opposite direction just as easily. A fair map can reverse a gerrymander, okay? But a map that reverses a gerrymander may not be fair. So one thing, some of the things you have to think about is in crafting the map, what do you do with your party data? Do you even access it, or do you keep it turned off and draw a map based upon neutral principles and then turn on the party data, go back and see, is it responsive and is it symmetrical? And if it's not, how do you adjust it while still adhering to your core values and principles? These are the things to be thinking about, is at what point does information about things like partisanship become relevant to ensuring fairness? That's a decision you all have to make. None of us can tell you, but the one thing I can say is that a good map won't start with party, but a good map will make sure that it assesses party at the end of the day, because all politics and all organizational principles of modern politics come back to party. People will say it's about rural and urban, and it's about upstate and downstate, and it's Milwaukee and Madison versus the rest of the state. That's not how the legislature is organized. It's organized by party. Power is allocated by party. And it's going to have to come back to party. So make sure it's fair and responsive for party.
And maybe just close with one thought. I imagine that you will be receiving lots of recommendations, if not pressure. It's a common argument. Just let computers do it. Let's set a rule. You have a computer, you plug it in, it generates a map, and we're done. Well, the problem with that, well, there are two problems with that. As Keith said, even a neutral rule can produce a very biased outcome, and reliance on an algorithm to produce a map could very well produce a map that is deeply flawed. The second problem with automated map methods is that it depends on who writes the program, or who defines the program. It turns out, and that there is an ongoing argument or a sort of debate, we'll call it, within the academic community about the ability of automated processes to draw effective maps. And it is complicated by the fact that the number of possible maps in a state like Wisconsin even if you assume a building block like wards. There are about 4,700 wards in the state. The number of possible combinations that Wisconsin can be districted into 99 districts, that number is larger than the number of hydrogen atoms in the universe. And there is no feasible way of generating all of those maps to even determine where a map you're drawing fits into that space. So one of the possible solutions, or one of the ways of dealing with that, is to, first of all, be skeptical or think critically about recommendations to rely on algorithmic maps, because there are a lot of programs and methods that exist that purport to do this in a fair way. But one of the things we're looking at here, a few months ago, we got a grant here, I and some colleagues in computer science, geography, and political science, to investigate redistricting from a multidisciplinary perspective. And one of the things that we are looking at is how you can use computer methods or algorithmic methods to evaluate a given map. So the idea is that you would draw a map based on judgment and what sort of looks like it meets the criteria for a map that you would regard as fair, responsive, neutral, symmetric. And then you use computers to make minor changes in the map, to perturb the map. And you do this trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of times. And you look at the distribution of all the maps that this process generates. And so you can see where your map exists in a geographic space against a huge number of alternatives. And that you can use that to determine how your map fits within the distribution of all possible maps starting from that point. So there are a variety of things that can be done, but in my view, and Keith shares this, is that this is not a process where you can push a button, tell a computer to go and use whatever Markov chain Monte Carlo models and all the different ways you can describe the map, come up with a map, and then be satisfied that you've done your job and everybody can go home. That's not how this is going to work. So I think with that, Keith, if we can just open it up to a broader discussion and answer questions that you have.
Yes.
All right. So thanks, Keith, and thanks, Kenneth, for that presentation. I'm sure our commissioners will have a variety of questions for you here. So we're now going to open up the floor for any questions that the commissioners may have this evening. If there are any more questions towards the end, we'll go through another time. But due to the time constraints, first off, we'll limit one question per commissioner. We'll kind of go through in a round robin setup here. So if any commissioners would like to pass during that time, let me know, and then we'll come back to you when we go back around. So let's start off with Commissioner Tobias in the 1st Congressional District.
Thank you, Chair Ford. So I really don't have any questions right now, but just a comment that I truly love those last keys that you had left us with, and really not looking at partisan information to begin with, but I think, taking a shot at a map, drawing it, and then kind of looking at importing that information and seeing how that turns out and making adjustments. I mean, I think that's really important. And the idea of responsiveness, I greatly appreciate and completely makes sense. So thank you both for your presentation and for the information. Thank you.
Commissioner Anthony from the 2nd Congressional District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Gaddy and Dr. Myers, for this insightful presentation tonight. From listening to the presentation and reading about the two of you, it sounds like you're on different sides of the spectrum, but hearing you guys present tonight, I'm challenged to kind of know where you guys differ. So my question is, where do you two part ways? where are your biggest disagreements? Because you agree on the key principles, you agree on the common definitions, but where do you two part ways? Because tonight you presented in a unified way, and that's where we need to be at the end of the day. But where do you two part ways?
Ken, do you want to take those, or do you want me to?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a very good question, because if you look at our history and who we had, provided analysis and expert opinions to, they frequently were different sides of litigation. But I actually don't think we, on anything substantive about these principles, I don't think we part ways. I think we are in virtually complete agreement about what these principles ought to be. And, I don't know about Keith's ideology. It's not really relevant for our purposes. So I couldn't tell you where we would agree and disagree on issues beyond this. I don't think it matters. But I would say that probably the biggest difference between us is that I'm a fan of the Badgers and he's a fan of the Sooners, and we probably would not have a good time if we were watching the Wisconsin-Oklahoma football game together. But I really don't see that there is any distance between us on what is important in these issues. I think we are very much on the same page.
You won at the football part each time.
Well, and actually, I was actually a football grad assistant at the University of Georgia. So it gets deeper and deeper once we get into Big Ten SEC time. But actually, there was a nice opportunity to clarify a thing about the kind of work that we do. In 2002, I was retained in part to testify for a map. And the maps that I testified for were responsive and symmetrical. Okay, they were responsive, symmetrical maps. And one thing that I discovered is that even though at that point in time, Ken and I were using somewhat different methodologies in certain areas, we were broadly agreed on the general scope of information about the maps that we testified on. And so when it comes to issues of data and analysis, we agree. But also the nature of our work as experts isn't political per se. Okay, we are hired by political people. And just because you hire expertise doesn't mean you hire the opportunity to say what someone's testimony will be. And one thing I think you should take note of is you won't find any evidence in 2011 or 2012 of me testifying to this map being remotely politically fair in terms of partisanship. I was never asked to, because if I had been asked that question, I would have said exactly the things I've said here today. There was no way I could testify to the partisan fairness of this map because it wasn't.
So one of the important things to note about the role of an expert witness, when I describe the work I did as an expert witness, or when Keith describes the work that he did as an expert witness is not an advocate. An expert witness in this context is retained to provide information that is useful to a judge in specialized applications and techniques that are used beyond what a judge might be familiar with. And so when we are hired, it has never been the case. I have never done it. Keith has never done it, where we are hired and are told, here is what we want you to say. That's not how it works. And it is, here is an empirical question we would like you to give an answer to. And it often involves specialized techniques that we use in our role as academics and scholars. So, Keith and I joke about being on opposite sides, but ultimately our role is not to argue with each other, or not to advocate for one side or another. It is to present analysis that answers an empirical question. So I think that's important to keep in mind as you think about information that you're getting from people who, as we have or might have been engaged in expert witness work on this issue.
Thank you both. For the 3rd Congressional District, Commissioner McClellan.
Yeah, hi. Thank you both for a very interesting presentation. The idea of using like basically those heat maps and trying to set a district and gerrymandering it, you can see how easy it might be with a heat map if that's your intent, is to pack and crack. But if your intent is not to do that, you might consider starting without using a data set, like I think he suggested, where you don't use the prior election data when you start drawing your district maps. And I'm really like a process, detail-oriented kind of person. And so where would you start? You know, with a commission like us, we have basic principles and we want to do something that's fair. Like, what are your recommendations for starting to actually do the map drawing? And then I guess another question that might take way too long is, what kind of tools would you use to assess whether you inadvertently did something, you know, that was unfair?
Well, this is the hard part, how you translate these principles and aspirations into an actual map, because you're not going to be able to collectively decide every aspect of what a particular map would look like. And at some point, there's going to have to be somebody with his or her hand on a mouse who is deciding to assign this ward or census block or whatever geography to a district, and you continue that until you have a valid map. It's also not going to be something that you can do in one shot, where you sit down and the first time you attempt to draw a map, that you know that you've got it right. I think one of the keys is to make sure that the person to whom you give the ability to produce a map, that they are aware of what your goals are, and that you, I mean, if I were the one making the decision, I would want to see a range of maps, not just one, but maps that use different starting points. You know, it will depend on, if you start in the southeast corner of the state, you will likely get, or actually almost certainly get, a map that looks different than a map if you start in the northwest corner of the state or the southwest corner of the state. To see that you have a range of possibilities, so that you get a sense of what the feasible options are. And I also think that Keith is right, that it's important that you do need to know in the end what the responsiveness and symmetry of a map is, and how it, not just what that map is, but how it compares to other similar maps. Because you can take a map. I mean, you could take the Act 43 map, and you could make some number of changes. It might be 50, it might be 30, and you could fix a lot of the problems, or a lot of the pathologies that we've identified. But I think the key is to understand that this is not going to be a process where you sit down, someone draws a map, you look at it, and you're done. It's going to be an iterative, multi-layered, non-linear process.
Yeah, and optics matter, but optics can fool you, which is, Ken and I could sit down and draw you a perfectly square district that was a gerrymander. I'm not sure where it would be, but we know we could do this thing. So don't let shape fool you. But I'll give you a hypothetical approach, because anytime you add a person to one district, you're going to take them away from somewhere else. So there's very much, my mama would have called this the unraveling sweater problem, right? Which we pull on a string in one place and it pulls throughout the entire fabric. So what you have to do is you have to equalize population to the extent practicable. For congressional districts, it has to be exacting, okay? you need to satisfy the Voting Rights Act. And so the question beyond that is, what do you want to turn off and what do you want to turn on? So let's turn off party and let's turn off incumbency also, okay? Let's just turn off incumbency for the time being and not worry about where the incumbents reside. And I'm sure they're going to be very upset to hear us say that, but we'll do this thing. Then you have to ask the question, is it really important to not cross a county boundary needlessly? Is it important to not break up a city any more than necessary? Is it important to not break up a town any more than necessary? Is it important to not break up a village any more than necessary? Is it important to have districts that are of a highly regular shape, that are compact? Okay. You can't do all these things at once. But one thing you could do is you could go to, it being Wisconsin, I'm going to decide that there are 5 corners instead of 4. Okay. But you go to the 5 corners of Wisconsin and you start drawing districts from the corners. And maybe you draw them so that you draw an entire district within a county and you keep drawing districts in that county until it's full of districts. And then you move on and you keep doing this. Or if you're dealing with rural counties, you keep putting together counties in a relatively compact fashion until you've created a district, and you don't split any more counties than necessary. And maybe you do the same thing with cities. You don't go outside the boundaries of the city of Milwaukee into the county of Milwaukee until you have to. You don't cross the Milwaukee county line until you have to. The thing is, I don't know how important county and city and town are in Wisconsin relative to, say, Georgia, where county has always been paramount. But if you do these things, you can start there, draw a map, and then what you can do is you can turn on the party data. And you can see, do you have a symmetrical responsive map? And you also look down and say, hey, did we satisfy the Voting Rights Act? And if you really messed up your voting rights districts, you go back and you fix those first, okay? Because there you're dealing with 14th Amendment obligations under the Constitution, right? Of non-discrimination. So you go back and you fix that. And then you adjust your map adhering to your principles as much as possible. And then you look at the product, you turn on the party data again and see, do you have a responsive symmetrical map? And then maybe you turn on the incumbency data and see who won and who lost in the process. But that's an approach, but it may not be the approach for Wisconsin. The approach for Wisconsin is decide what your values are, implement it without the party data on, then turn on the party data and do a check. That's as specific as I think I can get for you.
Yeah, and just to follow up on one thing that is just simply a definitional problem of map drawing. No matter what the map looks like that you sort of are settling on, no matter what a particular map looks like, it will always be possible to make some changes, to tweak it a little bit at the border so it looks a little bit different. So you swap this area, and from that district into that, and that process can continue forever. And this is where the reason we emphasize, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough, that at some point you have to be in a position to say that this is the map that meets the criteria that we think are important, and recognizing that you could make infinitesimal changes from now until the sun goes out, and you just have to be able to say that this is our map, and this is the map.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
From the Fourth Commission, Commissioner Rangel.
Yeah, thank you both for such a wonderful, informative presentation. I got a whole sheet full of notes here, learned a lot. So my question, I think I kind of know the answer to my question, but I wanted to ask it for the record, but also to sort of shed light on the partisan nature of map drawing in general. And what I mean by that is the examples you showed were examples here in Wisconsin where the GOP at the turn of the last decade had control of the legislature, and they were the ones drawing the maps. And so it's a partisan gerrymandering that favored the GOP. But I guess for the record and for maybe some viewers, can you speak to how, the process of drawing unfair partisan maps is certainly not just a Republican issue. Democrats have done it in the past. So maybe speak to like the history or what you know about Democrats doing the same thing, and highlight the importance of us creating a fair map being beneficial for both parties. Because if Democrats theoretically had control, they could have done the same thing. And so just emphasizing the essential nature of our role in creating a map that doesn't benefit one party one way or the other, and speak to the sort of the history of partisan gerrymandering on the Democratic side of things too, if you can.
Keith, do you want to take this?
Yeah, it'd be my pleasure. I'll be, first of all, wonderful question. And so in brief, without getting too deep in, the reason so many Republican states, so many maps were crafted in 2011 with Republican advantage district schemes was that the Republicans overperformed in the 2010 midterm elections and got exceptionally high control of state legislatures and governorships. So they went in. The Democrats have been notoriously bad historically at performing right before the redistricting cycle. They're bad at it. I don't know why. They always manage to lose way more than they need to right before the remap. Okay. So that being said, I'm going to direct you to 3 historic examples of note. One is in the ancient past, in 1982 in California, the so-called Phil Burton gerrymander, the Phil Burton map, which was crafted by Representative Phil Burton, U.S. Representative Phil Burton, in assistance to the California Assembly, which did an incredible job of locking in about 60% of the California delegation throughout the decade for the Democrats in Congress, and also locking in the Assembly majority for the Democrats in California. It was an incredibly non-responsive map. Then I would take you to the long-term maps that were in place in the state of Texas until 2004, which consistently translated about 55%, were translating roughly 55% of congressional votes for the Republicans into about 45% of the congressional seats in the state of Texas. Okay, and this is referred to as the Martin Frost map of 1991-1992, which really locked in Democratic advantage in the state of Texas and in their congressional delegation, and forestalled Republican capture of the congressional delegation. So the Tom DeLay gerrymander of 2004 not only undid that, but actually reversed it and moved in the opposite direction. Okay. But then my favorite is actually the Georgia maps of 2002. Which were drawn for the General Assembly, Senate and House, and also for Congress. And these maps did an extraordinary job of pairing up Republican incumbents together in districts in order to basically cut the Republican caucus in half in terms of the incumbents who could return to the Assembly the next year, because Georgia has a run where you stand law. Okay. Then it also made it possible for Democrats to hold on to 60% of legislative seats with 46% of the vote. And they did it through the creative use of multi-member districts, incredibly irregular shapes, and the creative use of population deviations to overpopulate Republican districts and underpopulate Democratic districts. And this was a vulnerability that got that map thrown out. This map was so creative. There was one district that started in Savannah, went out to the Tybee Lighthouse, went down this chain of islands down the Georgia coast, down to Jekyll Island, then came in through the Okefenokee Swamp and went up to Waycross, Georgia, just north of the Florida border. There was another district that started in Columbus, Georgia, on the Alabama border. It was never more than 10 miles wide, snaked to Macon in the middle of the state, where it met another snake that was about the same width that went all the way over to Augusta, the home of Augusta National Golf Course and the Masters. There were districts that crossed lakes and otherwise had no contiguity. This is what we call duck contiguity, because you basically have to be a duck to swim in the water to stay in the district when you go to move about it. So you saw every redistricting principle go out the window. The map was designed to maximize Democratic advantage. It was designed to be non-responsive, to defy the growth of the Republican majority in Georgia. And it was thrown out by the federal courts in 2004 in a case called Cox v. Larios. Okay, so those are three examples to come to mind, but there are others.
So one of the things to add to that is that in 2018 and 2019, there were 3 gerrymandering cases that eventually wound up in the Supreme Court. Wisconsin,
Virginia,
North Carolina, and Maryland. Wisconsin and North Carolina were Republican gerrymanders. Maryland was a Democratic gerrymander in which the Maryland legislature, which was democratically controlled, essentially retaliated and redrew a district on the western part of Maryland for the avowed open purpose of removing a Republican congressman from office. So this has a long history. That the reason that we are talking about this as a Republican issue is that most of the gerrymanders that triggered this new wave of litigation over the last 8 years that ended when the Supreme Court said that they weren't going to consider them were maps that were drawn by Republican state governments. But this is why we caution at the end there is undoubtedly a temptation to feel like you need to respond tit for tat and retaliate and to get payback. But that's why a reverse gerrymander is not the same thing as a fair map.
Thank you so much.
From the 5th Congressional District, Commissioner Ram.
Thank you. Dr. Gaddy, you mentioned earlier something about what's right for Wisconsin. So in addition to sort of empirical principles that we'll be considering, we'll need to look at the culture and climate and what sort of fits for our state. Is there an approach or a state that you learned about over the years that you recommend that we look more into that might be more sort of aligned with the direction we might want to go in Wisconsin?
Well, I'm going to be seemingly glib, but I don't mean to seem glib, which is I'm going to say ask a Wisconsinite.
Great idea.
And I'm going to pass to Kenneth, which is there's a limit. I lived in Louisiana for a number of years. I've done a lot of work in Texas. I lived in Georgia for a number of years, Oklahoma. I'm very comfortable weighing in because my expertise in Southern politics, I'm familiar with the culture and the history and the issues. But you need to ask a Wisconsinite. Ken, I'm going to pass this one to you.
Right. So, I think in one regard, the principles that we have outlined are universal when we're talking about fairness and symmetry and responsiveness. But in terms of how they are applied in a particular context and the geography of a state, I would say it depends on what your goals are. Is it to create a map that I'm just using this hypothetically because I don't know off the top of my head how you would do this. But you can take my colleague Kathy Kramer's work about rural resentment or the feeling that voters or people who live in upstate or outside of cities often feel like they get the short end of the stick when it comes to allocation of resources. And it's not clear how you would resolve that with regard to redistricting. But it would depend. I mean, this is why this commission has representatives from each congressional district, because we have a mix of cities and rural and really rural parts of the state, that it's your judgment about what the people whom you in this capacity represent, what in your judgment is consistent with their goals and beliefs. And there are so many dimensions to this that I don't think it's really possible to sort of lay out what they, what those things ought to look like. That's kind of internal to this process that you're engaged in.
Thank you.
From the 6th Congressional District, Commissioner Prentice.
Yes, just to echo my fellow commissioners, thank you both so much for this presentation and for your really thoughtful answers to the questions so far. It's been incredibly informative. So my question is, given your expertise and knowledge of Wisconsin's political landscape, what do you think are going to be, I guess, the most unique challenges that our commission is facing that we need to be aware of as we work to bring fair maps to the state?
So I'll take a first crack at this. I think one of the difficult things of this process is how you deal with we'll call it public pressure or beliefs by stakeholders that a fair map must look this way or a fair map must look that way, recognizing that in a very real sense, the dimensions of gerrymandering or the criteria by which we traditionally evaluate the maps, they are in tension with each other. You want a map that is compact. You are giving up something that you're going to be giving up. Well, you can't really give up population equality, but you're going to be giving up municipal splits, or you're going to be giving up competitiveness. You want a map that reflects that keeps what, in your judgment, is an important community of interest. Well, that is going to come at the expense of trading off some other dimension. And I think it's important to be able to explain to the public why you are supporting this map as opposed to an alternative, recognizing that this is a recursive process that could actually never end, but being able to produce a map that is defensible and according to the criteria and values that you lay out. Because even transparency, which is a vital value here, that comes at a cost, because it's like a divorce lawyer says, you've done a good job when everybody is unhappy. That maybe that's what the answer is. If everybody feels like you're not going to be able to produce a map that satisfies all the demands of everybody. So the question is, how do you decide or balance off what can easily be inconsistent views and we'll call them demands, or inconsistent pressure for producing a map that looks in a particular way.
Yeah, picking your principles and sticking to them is going to matter. As a practical matter, I'm gonna think like an AM talk radio host for a couple of minutes, and then express that. You're going to get a lot of pressure for districts that look clean and square, right? The public likes to look at a map and see a plate full of brownies. Okay, I like to see a pan full of brownies. You're going to get pressure from rural areas that don't understand why is it that those cities are getting so many more districts, or that town, or why are there so many seats over there? And somehow, and also you're going to get pressure from particular communities or groups who don't understand why people who are not like them appear to get more. Okay. So, this, in many ways, I'm echoing Ken's sentiment here, which is it's going to be about particular pressure and particular petition based upon self-interest. And they're going to attempt to convey this as somehow being the general interest, and that what you're doing cheats that somehow. The problem is that conveying a map that doesn't appear to look compact as being compact is difficult for people to understand. And many people think that a map of compact districts, which means they're of reasonable shape, means that on the map they're all the same size. Okay, so the public often has difficulty engaging the technical words that we use in the process. Your all's first obligation is to equalize the population. Well, here's the other thing. You're going to catch pressure to either use citizenship population or to equalize voters across districts. That's going to be something you're going to find certain groups advocating for, okay? The case law is consistent. The representation is about more than the translation of votes into seats. It's also about general access of a constituent to representation. And if you try and equalize districts based upon the number of voters in the district or the number of citizens in the district, you're going to end up with some districts maybe twice as large in terms of population, which means twice as much casework requests on certain lawmakers, okay? So it's very important to remember, this is not just about voters, it's about, and it's not just about citizens, it's about residents. Because all the case law says an actual apportionment is about people. It does not mention the word citizen, it's about people. And your obligation is to equalize people. And then to consider not just the fairness of elections, but the fairness of the representative function. I mean, you have a full-time legislature, it's a full-time job. And you're going to make that job decidedly unequal if you start applying criteria that create disproportionate constituency burden on some lawmakers over others. So, you know, there are interesting, seemingly sensible tricks that people will throw at you. And you need to be aware of those, and you need to stick to your criteria and follow them through. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate the question.
From District 7, Commissioner Bissonnette.
All right, thank you. So the issue with being the 7th one in line here is a lot of my questions have already been asked and answered. So, you know, I absolutely appreciate your experience and sharing that. Just the depth of knowledge that you're bringing to this. I know. See, I've had lots of questions about like just community of interest, and you know, I believe in your Dr. Gaddy. After watching your YouTube video about when you were in Mizzou.
Oh yeah.
So in there, you were talking about the rural stretch of, and I imagine that's, well, that's certainly up here. That's something I'm very interested in how that works. But again, you've answered those questions. So I don't know, maybe I should just stop talking. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll say thank you. And I'll move on. So thank you.
Absolutely, Jason. Thanks, man. So from the 8th Congressional District, last but not least, Commissioner Phillips.
Yes, thank you, Chair Ford. I'm also not going to ask a question. I think we want to hear from our citizens. And I'm hoping we'll get to hear from Dr. Meyer and Dr. Gaddy again and ask them questions maybe at some point in the future in the meetings. I would echo what other people have said, that incredible experts, so experienced and so knowledgeable. The commission is so lucky to hear from these experts tonight, consultants that were on opposite sides in 2011, but agree completely that the resulting 2011 map was heavily partisan gerrymandered and that it needs to be fixed in 2021. I think that's extremely powerful information that the commission can use going forward. And so I thank you both again, and I'll stop, Chair Ford.
So I appreciate that, appreciate the kind words, and it would be my pleasure to come back and talk to you again. I'm sure that Keith feels the same way, and we can figure out a time to do this.
It will absolutely be my pleasure. And thank you for your time. It's very, like I said, I'm out of this business. I do different things now, but I felt it was very important to be here with Ken to support this commission. So I appreciate your work, and please give us a call anytime.
As do I. It's a privilege to talk to you, and this is the embodiment of the Wisconsin idea. So we can assist, and we should import the Wisconsin idea to Oklahoma.
So thank you both for taking the opportunity to speak. And, I'm pretty sure I speak for the rest of the commissioners as well as saying, we definitely will hold you to that. We definitely want to hear more from you and have more questions. If anything else to discuss Big Ten versus SEC football too. So I'm a South Carolina Gamecock and I did residency at UW. So we kind of got both there. So
Okay, thank you for having us.
Absolutely. So thank you, commissioners, for all your questions tonight. This formally ends the portion of the hearing for questioning. We'll take a short 4-minute break before we move to the public testimony of the hearing. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. It's possible
We're live.
This is Jason. It's possible I messed up my video here.
Oh, that's okay.
That's okay. Okay. We will now begin approximately 1 hour of public testimony. The individuals testifying tonight registered ahead of tonight's meeting. As a reminder to tonight's testifiers, this hearing is recorded and being live streamed. Each individual will have 3 minutes to testify to the commission. A 2-minute warning bell will ring when your time is up, and I will note when your 3 minutes are over, and we'll move on to the next individual. To ensure the maximum amount of members of the public can address the commission tonight, the commission members will not be answering any questions or providing any comments following individuals' testimony. This is very similar to a practice that legislative committees follow, such as the Legislative Committee for Joint Finance. Finally, as a reminder, if any members of the public would like to provide feedback or comments to the commission at any point throughout the tenure of the People's Maps Commission process, you are encouraged to submit comments through the public comment form that is available on wisconsin.gov/peoplesmaps. We're now going to begin with the first member of the public testifying, Kristen Voskuil from the 5th Congressional District.
Hi, my name's Kristen. I live in Waterloo, Wisconsin. My computer doesn't have a camera, so we're having spooky disembodied voice testimony today. Second, I am a volunteer for the League of Women Voters, but my statement represents my views alone. So one of the things I do for the League is that I talk to high school and college students about voting, but also about other ways to get involved. And I emphasize that they should contact their legislators about topics that they care about or propose laws. I do still encourage it, despite my own increasingly negative experiences with contacting legislators over the past decade. Partisan activity creates so-called safe districts. But to me, it seems like some legislators feel so safe that how you're treated if you contact them or their office has gone beyond, do you seem to be in the same party as them? You have to agree with them instead 100% on an issue in order to get time or courtesy from them. I've contacted legislators on issues where I both agreed and disagreed with them. Each time I'm very polite to the person I'm talking or writing to. I mean, I'm a Sunday school teacher. I just can't swear at people. I can't do it. So, but if you express a position that is contrary to theirs, not only do you not feel heard, but usually you get some sort of condescending lecture actually from them, frankly implying that they know far better on these subjects than you do. So I and many other people that I've talked to across Wisconsin feel like our representatives are not representatives anymore. Instead, they become more like parental figures, telling us what they're going to do for our own good and not taking any back talk from us. I do not expect to have my own way all the time. And while the Republicans are the ones doing it right now, I don't want Democrats to partisan redistrict either. When I help people to register to vote, sometimes they want to talk politics and they say things that I really don't agree with, but I help them anyway because I think people deserve to be heard. I would like to have legislators be open to listening to the people they represent, that they show that they're a human being who can let feedback shape their actions at times, instead of just reciting back the position of whatever party they belong to. Thank you very much. That's my time.
Perfect. Thank you so much. The next individual for this evening is Lena Eng from the 5th Congressional District. Lena?
Hi, first of all, I want to thank Commissioner Phillips for your kind words earlier in your introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Lena Eng from New Berlin. I've lived here for 29 years. I'm testifying as a longtime Republican voter and on behalf of the cross-partisan anti-corruption organization called Represent Us Wisconsin. I first wanted to share some indisputable proof that my side intentionally gerrymandered. My vote was used as a pawn to turn a blue district red. I am going to be, I don't know if you can see my screen, but I'm going to be reading an email that was discovered during the lawsuit from my state senator at that time. She wrote, "If you need a way to take the Staskina seat, put a little bit of my Senate seat into New Berlin. 2 to 3 wards could make that a GOP assembly seat." So after redistricting, I became part of that New Berlin ward that was moved to 8015 when the Republicans took the Staskina seat by 5,000 votes in 2012. In summary, 8015 went from blue to red and from a very competitive to a non-competitive race. So while I really do like my Republican legislator now because I lean conservative, I still call a spade, and I urge an end to this un-American practice. You know, gerrymandering has negatively affected me and my family. There's an African proverb that says, when the elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. All of us are paying the heavy price when party leaders on either side gerrymander, because it creates contempt for the other side that hinders a good working relationship. Think about the COVID response. You know, we have millions of hardworking middle-class families trying to survive this health and economic crisis while party leaders are trying to pit us against each other. We need to get back to solving these significant problems through collaboration. And that means healthy debate of ideas, compelling persuasion based on consensus data, and bipartisan legislation. My preferred redistricting model is largely to follow the Iowa model. It's transparent, it's a nonpartisan process where legislators will give an up or down vote in order to pass the maps. One other key point is I think we need to minimize the number of counties and municipalities that the legislators have to serve. And as noted in the presentation, because there's going to be numerous acceptable map versions to choose from, let's select the maps with the most neutral efficiency gap that doesn't materially favor one party over the other. By using these guidelines, I think we're going to be much better positioned to lower the contempt between the two parties, allowing our elected representatives to better serve all of their constituents and work across the aisle to solve problems on a more united front. This is what will move Wisconsin forward. We are better together. Thanks for listening.
Perfect. Thank you, Lena. The next individual testifying this evening is Jane Spear from the 5th Congressional District. Jane? Oh, you're still muted, Jane. It's okay, it happens to the best of us. Oh, you're not, no.
All right, here we go.
There you go. We'll start your 2 minutes right now. Thanks.
Thank you. My name's Jane Spear, and I've lived in the 5th Congressional District near Delafield for the past 5 years. I would like to address the effects I see of gerrymandering and extreme partisanship and on health care. I'm retired from a career in mental health care. I'm also a survivor of breast cancer, which gave me a serious pre-existing condition at the age of 39. This has made me acutely aware of the need for affordable health care that covers pre-existing conditions. Soon after the 2016 election, my now retiring congressman held a town hall in Oconomowoc. It was filled with many very emotional constituents, extremely fearful of losing their health care and begging our congressman to help preserve their coverage. The most this congressman would commit to was saying that everyone should have access to health care, which doesn't mean affordable, nor is it a protection against pre-existing conditions. In a subsequent listening session, I asked my congressman to stand up for the people and the country over his party and to hold the president to the truth. 4 years later, I have not seen one example of my congressman ever deviating from his party line, and in fact, repeatedly voting to take down the affordable health care his constituents were begging him to protect. When Governor Evers was elected in 2018, I was outraged at the Republican majority's passage of legislation to curtail his powers before he even took office. The gerrymandered districts have insulated our legislators from the people they represent. And so they act with boldness and impunity. This April, with the pandemic spreading, I implored my state legislatures to work with the governor to find a safer way to hold the primary election. Instead, they forced the election to go forward in person, and I watched in dismay as thousands of citizens risked their health to exercise their right to vote. Our government failed in its duty to protect them. And now we see that instead of working with the governor to protect public health and the surging pandemic that we have, the majority party is using our tax dollars to litigate nearly every public health initiative the governor undertakes. They are not working for the people. They are doing what the most extreme segments of their party demand. The pandemic is putting a bright spotlight on how dysfunctional our government is in working for the health, welfare, and safety of our citizens. People are dying because of their failure to work cooperatively on behalf of constituents. We deserve so much better from our elected officials. I'm very encouraged with the formation of the People's MAP Commission, and I'm very impressed with those of you who are on it. Thank you very much for your important work and for this opportunity to speak with you tonight.
Thank you, Jane. The next individual for this evening is Ann Johnson from the 5th Congressional District. Ann?
Hi, my name is Ann Johnson. I was born in Racine. I grew up in Milwaukee. I went to college in Madison. I raised my family in Lake Mills. And recently I moved to the village of Lac La Belle in Waukesha County in the 5th CD. I've had the very good fortune to live on the homelands of the Menominee, Fox, Sauk, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Ho-Chunk people my entire life. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I spent my career working in the field of adoption. I became actively engaged in state politics as a volunteer in 2006 when an amendment to the Wisconsin Constitution was put on the ballot to make domestic partnerships and LGBTQ marriage illegal. Some of my most devoted adoptive parents were gay and lesbian. This amendment threatened their ability to marry and share parental rights. Ironically, at the same time this amendment was on the ballot, state adoption workers actively recruited gay and lesbian individuals to provide permanent homes for the hardest children to place, the thousands of children in foster care in Wisconsin with special needs. It has been said, if the question of whether or not you are considered to be a full human being has never had to be determined by a court of law, you are privileged. As a woman, I understand what this means. Witnessing the suffering and fear of my gay and lesbian clients when their rights as human beings were being denied and stripped away, I understand this. Listening to the agony in the voices of mothers and fathers with Black sons and daughters seeking racial justice, I understand this. Witnessing Indigenous people arrested for trying to protect their land and water, I understand this. Our country was founded on principles of equality and democracy. These are ideals. They are ideals that have yet to be fully realized. It has taken the courage and determination of Indigenous people, people of color, LGBTQ people, and women, often risking life and liberty to carry these ideals forward as we as a nation continue to try to actualize them. This spring and summer, we saw right here in our state the peaceful uprising of people to protest the racial injustices still so inherent in our systems of power. People want change, and yet our state legislature gavelled in and gavelled out without discussing any of the issues of concern to the majority of Wisconsinites: clean water, police reform, gun safety laws, the expansion of Medicare, fair maps. Safely ensconced in their gerrymandered districts, the majority of our representatives have done nothing to address these life and death issues. One person, one vote. It's pretty simple. We all want to matter. We all need to matter if we have any hope of saving our democracy. We need fair maps so that each vote does matter. Thank you so much for the work you're doing to bring fair maps to Wisconsin.
Thank you, Anne. The next individual for this evening is Vicky Aro Shakmuth from the 5th Congressional District. Vicky, do you want to get started? Oh. I wonder if Vicky can hear us. We'll try to send a message to Vicky. So it might be that her speaker isn't on and she's unable to hear us. So we're going to move on to the next individual for this evening, and hopefully we can get Vicky sort of the technical difficulty on her end figured out. The next individual is Lisa Conley from the 5th Congressional District. Lisa?
You're on mute, Lisa.
Lisa, you're muted. Lisa?
Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
There
Hello?
you are. Great.
Oh, hello. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for this opportunity. I have lived in Oconomowoc for 50 years, and I've held leadership positions with lake and river organizations for over 30 years, including the Lac La Belle Management District, the Wisconsin Association of Lakes, and the Rock River Coalition. When I was president of the Wisconsin Association of Lakes, we worked with both parties to establish statewide laws and rules to protect water quality. We worked very well with both Democratic Jim Holprin and Republican Rob Coles to sponsor bills which were signed into law by governors of both Democrat and Republicans. I am now beyond frustrated to see many of these rules and laws weakened after the 2012 gerrymandering. In 2012, Senator Jim Holprin, one of our best lake advocates, was gerrymandered out of his district and replaced by Tom Tiffany, a conservative voice against regulation. Since then, lake protections have been eliminated that our lake organization had worked for decades to establish. For example, shoreland zoning standards have been adopted by all 71 Wisconsin counties, and 54 of these counties, including Waukesha, went beyond the minimum standards and adopted stronger measures to protect trout streams and their most sensitive waters. But in 2015, the state minimum shoreland zoning standards were changed to be the state maximum standards. And this change was slipped into the state budget in the middle of the night with no public hearing. The 54 counties who had stronger standards could no longer enforce the stricter measures they had adopted to protect waters in their area. This was a breathtaking power play driven by special interests who wanted to profit from overdevelopment and a loss for our lake and waters statewide. It usurped the power of county zoning to protect waters in their own jurisdiction. I could go on. High capacity well regulations, agricultural runoff standards are among the many other critical water protections that I've worked on that have been weakened since Wisconsin was gerrymandered. Now within District 5, my Assembly District number 38 and my Senate District 13 boundaries have cut my home lake, Lac La Belle, away from the rest of the Waukesha County Lake Country, which is now divided into 3 Assembly and 2 Senate districts. Okauchee and Pewaukee Lake are each cut in half by Assembly districts. This weakens our collective voice to protect Lake Country, a most valuable resource for Waukesha County that should be together in one district. Our Lake Country Clean Water Organization is now cut in three politically. This makes my representatives, Senator Fitzgerald and Barbara Dietrich, unresponsive to voices like mine who want to protect the lakes that are so important to Wisconsin's economy and quality of life. Whether you like to fish, swim, boat, or simply just take a deep breath and look out over the water, the voice of our nonpartisan citizen organizations like Wisconsin Lakes and Lake Country Clean Waters has been seriously weakened by the current political divisions. I understand that Arizona, California, and Iowa are good examples of how to draw maps that will restore a fairer districting and more responsive legislative bodies. And I certainly thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm going to go back to Vicky Aro Shackmuth now, and hopefully the technology is working and she can hear us. Vicky? Oh, and now you're muted. So the technology gods are not in our favor this evening. There you go.
Okay, there we go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Should I start now?
Yes, please go ahead. Yes.
Okay, hi. My name is Vicky Aro Shackmuth. I am a resident of Heartland, Wisconsin in Congressional District 5. I would like the People's Maps Commission to reduce the opportunities of manipulation for political gain in the redistricting process. Congressional District 5 has a recent history of partisan gerrymandering. I will discuss this in more detail, but first it's necessary to define a few essential terms. What is a democracy? A democracy is a system of government by the whole population or all the eligible members of a state, typically through elected representatives. A republic is a state in which supreme power is held by the people and their elected representatives. In 2015, the Supreme Court established one person, one vote is the intent of the Constitution in the Evenwell versus Abbott decision. A shortened excerpt from Justice Thomas's opinion on this case states, there is a principle which requires electoral districts to be apportioned according to population, thus making each district roughly equal in population. The Constitution over the past 52 years has a basic understanding that each person who casts a vote is equal to every other voter. It is essential to the core theory of a democracy that the people rule and do so with equal political authority. That has come to be known as the equality principle of one person, one vote. He goes on, of course, that equality principle can be defeated. One way is that redistricting maps can be gerrymandered in a way that makes one's political party an advantage or disadvantage at election time. This unconstitutional partisan gerrymandering is exactly what took place in Wisconsin in 2011. The party in the majority drew maps in secret in the privacy of an attorney's office instead of the state capitol. Senator Leah Vukmir, representing District 5, participated in this private process. Emails have been discovered between Vukmir and Senate aide Tad Ottman, aide to Senate Majority Leader Scott Fitzgerald. She writes, Tad, this is such a big task. So glad we have control, exclamation point. Here's a summary of what we talked about and a few things I thought of after. Brookfield, yes. Elm Grove, yes. Western Wauwatosa, yes, more GOP. West Allis, yes. Western, more GOP. West Milwaukee, no, very down. Milwaukee, cop wards if needed. Menominee Falls, no. Greenfield, please, no. New Berlin, sure. The email goes on and she signs off, hope that helps, Leah. It looks like Senator Leah Vukmir was at a McDonald's drive-thru ordering up her voters. This cherry picking of voters has left Congressional District 5 containing portions of 6 different counties. This is a classic example of gerrymandering. This gerrymandering is why I would like the map drawing process to be guided by the citizens living in the district and not by the elected officials who are politically motivated. I believe each district should assemble an advisory group of 5 individuals from the district, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and 1 third party or independent, one of them being the member of the People's Maps Commission. Once the initial maps are drawn, the lines should remain static unless there is a shift in population in the district. An appeal process could be established to adjust the static lines for other reasons, requiring the appeal to derive from a citizen of the district. In closing, partisan gerrymandering is undemocratic, unrepresentative, and unconstitutional. We can lose our democracy if we don't protect it. Thank you for listening.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Vicki.
Yep.
The next
Thank
individual. Thank you. The next individual is Ken Eimers from the 5th Congressional District. Ken?
Hello, my name is Ken Eimers. I have lived in the Lake Mills area for about 30 years. Although Lake Mills is my home, I consider Jefferson County more of the broader community that I'm part of. I'm also a member of the Jefferson County Fair Maps Coalition. Over the past 2 years, I have volunteered to help adults in Jefferson County achieve their citizenship. In my discussions with them, it has been enlightening to hear some of their stories on how their countries of origin felt more like a democracy on paper rather than a real democracy. I think in the end, Wisconsin is going along that same path where politicians are picking their voters rather than voters picking their politicians. My own community of Jefferson County is a good example of gerrymandering. There are 4 assembly districts that cross Jefferson County. Of these 4 assembly districts, 3 of the representatives actually live well outside of Jefferson County. The 4th assembly representative lives on the very edge of the county, with 95% of his district being well outside of the county. In addition, there are 3 Senate districts that cross through Jefferson County. None of these senators live in Jefferson County. Our Jefferson County community has been carved up into many pieces, with our congressional district boundaries manipulated to solely accommodate political power motives rather than what best serves the people of Jefferson County. It feels in many respects like we don't count. On a broader scale, the effects of gerrymandering have been the underlying reason our Wisconsin legislature has been able to be absent since April of 2020. During this current time of crisis with a pandemic, the Wisconsin legislature has been the least active full-time state legislative body in the nation and has not met in 191 days. Because of the gerrymandering, our representatives don't fear losing their jobs because they know they will be reelected. A host of nonpartisan organizations across the state have called upon the Senate and the Assembly to get back to work and deal with the growing number of important local and statewide issues. Issues, for example, surrounding agriculture, funding for public education, and funding for people with disabilities, all which affect Jefferson County. Wisconsin has been so thoroughly gerrymandered that today it feels more like a one-party rule form of government rather than a real democracy. I don't place blame with any particular party for this alarming situation. Both major parties have historically supported this current redistricting process. I do look forward to a future that entrusts the redistricting process to an independent,
Thank you, Ken.
partisan commission and restores our democracy. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. The next individual this evening is Rolf Nervig from the 5th Congressional District.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much. My name is Rolf Nervig. I actually didn't know exactly how this whole hearing was working, and so I'm actually from the 2nd Congressional District, living in McFarland, Wisconsin. I've lived most of my time in the city of Milwaukee, but I appreciate the time to share my thoughts. A phrase that we've heard often during this election season is, quote, "Elections have consequences," end quote. That phrase is sometimes invoked by the party in power to rebuke the minority opposition in a partisan debate. It's another way of saying, stop complaining, live with it. Yes, elections do have consequences, and we are living with these consequences in Wisconsin, as we see our legislature locked in a power battle with the governor over whether to take action to mitigate the COVID pandemic or simply to ignore it. Our political system is based on the concept of fair representation of the views of citizens. That concept was hijacked in 2011 by a secretive, partisan redistricting process that systematically sought to divide districts along unfair lines in order to advantage Republican interests. If the Democrats were in a similar power position, they might do the same thing, and this would be equally unfair. I would not be in favor of that. In 2021, we need a nonpartisan, transparent, data-driven process to arrive at district maps that more accurately reflect the will of the people. And I thank each one of you on the commission for your time and your energy to accomplish that. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Rolf. Next for this evening, we have Lynn Carey from the 5th Congressional District. Lynn?
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Lynn Carey, and I live in Germantown, which is in Washington County. I've lived here most of my adult life, but grew up in Wauwatosa, so I'm a lifelong resident of the 5th CD. I live in the 24th Assembly District, which you heard about earlier, and the 8th State Senate District. I want gerrymandering to end, and I am not alone. Wisconsinites across the state endorse nonpartisan gerrymandering and nonpartisan redistricting, I apologize. Through citizen organizing, community forums, county board resolutions, and contacting legislators, we have made our opposition to gerrymandering known. And yet, although a majority of Wisconsinites support fair maps, and you heard that earlier, we have not been able to move forward. Why? The current leadership of the state legislature opposes reform. I have personally spoken more than once to both the state representative and the state senator in my district. I was told that the courts found the current map to be fair and that there was no need to spend time or money on that project. I talked to our county leadership, Washington County leadership, and was told that Washington County does not do resolutions. And didn't I see the results of the last election in Washington County? Washington County votes pretty much along one party line. So in other words, my voice was put aside. And gerrymandering isn't just the only issue where I feel my voice is dismissed. As a retired nurse and as a double lung transplant recipient, I have long advocated for healthcare and fairness in healthcare. I strongly supported and support accepting federal funds through Medicaid expansion. If Wisconsin had accepted Badger Care under the ACA, more Wisconsinites would have gained access to health insurance. For example, I know a young man named Jonathan. He works worked 2 jobs in restaurants, in the restaurant industry, and he would qualify for health insurance under expanded Badger Care. He also has a pre-existing condition. He does not seek help when he needs it. It is estimated that 120,000 people would gain access to Medicaid if the state accepted expansion, and the state uninsured would drop by 16%. People would be helped. And we're certainly seeing that with the COVID pandemic right now. The benefits of Medicaid expansion has been researched and well documented. When I shared my thoughts and the research studies with elected officials, these same elected officials, I was told that there would not be support for Medicaid expansion because the money might run out, but that they would look at the research. Even when I followed up, I needed to supply the research again, which was a pretty strong message for me. So is this because that there are many elections where there is not even an opponent on the ballot here in Washington County? Or is it because the chance of losing the legislature is small? Is it the will of the people is ignored because the state is so gerrymandered that a political party will hold a majority of seats, even when receiving less votes? And I'm sorry I went over.
No. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much for your good work.
Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
The next individual on the list is Catherine Cripes of the 5th Congressional District. Catherine, you are muted, so you'll make sure, no worries.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good evening, and my name is Catherine Cripps. I'm a voter in the 5th Congressional District. I'm originally from Milwaukee, and I've lived in Hartford, Dodge County, and out of state as well. West Bend has been my home for the past 21 years. Lots of things have changed since we moved here in 1999. The city and the traffic have grown. Open fields near our house now grow stores and subdivisions. There's a Black family living just down the block. My sons have some friends whose first try for free breakfast and lunch at school. Affordable housing, substance abuse, and domestic violence are all concerns in West Bend. More recently, we've been dealing with increasing unemployment and the growing number of COVID cases in this area. We've seen quite a few protests and many gun-carrying counter-protesters. It's been an interesting time. I've asked to speak tonight because I'm concerned for my city and our state. I'm a regular voter, but for more than 2 decades in West Bend, I've never had a congressional representative or a state legislator who actually represented my point of view. The same holds true for many of my neighbors and thousands of others here in Wisconsin. In West Bend, we've had the same congressman since 1979. Major redistricting happened after the 2000 census, but all it did was to make this district into more of a one-party stronghold. It also denied the rest of us our right to be represented. All our voices and our votes should matter to our elected officials. Instead, their seats are so secure that politicians no longer have to worry about representing all of us. I'm afraid that many here have given up on the political process. For example, in November, there are no opposing candidates for either state or county positions listed. By now, most here have realized that they don't stand a chance of winning, at least not here. And a whole lot of our community's most urgent needs and problems are simply not being addressed. I worry every day about how we're all going to get by and get along. On the eve of this crucial election, we need to focus on what's most important, not only for ourselves. Here in Wisconsin, we can make a difference by protecting the rights of everyone to express their opinion, to vote, and to be represented. Please help to make our legislative districts all more fair for everyone who calls this state home. And thank you very much for your time tonight.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry for mispronouncing your last name.
Okay, everybody does. That's why I just say it again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next individual for this evening is Claire Sprenger. And did I pronounce your last name correctly? Sprenger?
Yes.
Close enough. Perfect. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
I didn't do as much homework as a lot of the other people commenting.
Oh, we can, your volume is very, very low. Would you mind speaking up just a little bit so we can hear you?
Hello?
Oh, perfect. Yep.
Can you hear me
Yep.
better now?
Yep. There we go. Thank you.
Okay. So I didn't do as much homework as a lot of the other people commenting tonight. And I just want to say I'm really grateful that my fellow citizens have spoken out with so much insight and wisdom on this issue. I'm a 4.5-year member of the United Brotherhood of Carpenters Millwright and Piledriver Local 2337. And I was sent out to this really awesome conference at our International Training Center in Vegas last year in December or something. And I'm sure a lot of people here know this statistic, but I thought it was worth reiterating. And I took a photo of the slide because it just was so mind-boggling. I knew gerrymandering was a problem, but not this bad. So in 2018, for our state assembly election, Democrats won, or 54% of voters voted for Democratic candidates, and 64% of state assembly seats went to Republicans. I found that statistic jarring. And when I got notice about this meeting in my email, I figured it's the main thing I have to share, other than being super excited that you guys are doing this, because I grew up in Wisconsin. I love this state. I want to spend the rest of my life here, and I want it to be a good place to live, and that doesn't happen without a strong democracy. So thank you for letting me comment.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And the last individual testifying this evening is Leslie DeMuth. Leslie?
I'm from Lake Mills in Jefferson County. I'm speaking in favor of nonpartisan redistricting by an independent commission. Prior to the redistricting in 2011, I had a Republican senator and a Democratic representative. We didn't always
congressional representative
we didn't always
or a
agree on
state
everything,
legislator,
but we could discuss policy, and I was listened to. That is no longer the case. After the redistricting, my assembly district now stretches from suburban Waukesha County through rural Jefferson and into Dane, urban city in Waukesha County. He didn't know the people of Jefferson County, and he made it clear that he didn't need to, because as long as he could win the election with votes from his hometown,
happened after the 2000 census, but all it did was to make this district into one party stronghold.
Leslie?
I'm really confused.
It also denied the rest of us
You
Yes.
actually
our right
the
to
YouTube
represent.
on as well?
I actually did what?
Do you have the YouTube channel playing as you're testifying?
All right, what am I doing wrong? Wait.
So if you have the YouTube channel on, you should just turn that off, and you should just stay.
I so apologize. Okay, can I start again, please? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, we'll
I'm really
restart your clock so people can hear you. Go ahead.
All right. I'm from
Oh, Leslie, I think you're having some connection issues on your end.
Republican senator and a Democratic representative. We did. Yes, that could be because I send this in as a written testimony at this point.
Yes, I did hear that. Yes. If you would please submit it as written testimony, that would be wonderful. And the hearings are always going to be open for public testimony, regardless of what district you're in. So if you would like to testify for the next hearing, we encourage you to sign up and do so then too. I'm sorry that the connection wasn't working so well. Okay, thank you to the members of the public who testified this evening, and Chair Ford. I will now pass it to you. Thank you. And I'll pass it back to you to close out the hearing and adjourn.
Thanks, Molly. And thanks to all the public for providing testimony this evening. Sorry to Leslie. We'll try to get your testimony either in a written format, or we'll see you at our next meeting that we'll have upcoming. I want to thank the 5th Congressional District. I want to thank our speakers tonight providing testimony, to Keith Gaddy as well as to Kenneth Meyer. And I also want to thank my fellow commissioners for being present tonight and asking some very pertinent questions as well, and look forward to getting into this information a little bit in depth with you guys as well. Tonight from our speakers, we've heard a lot of great information regarding the importance of fair maps, as well as the importance of the process and things to keep in mind. From our speakers, largely we've heard the importance of representation, as well as the importance of one person and one vote. And from a few of our public testimony, we heard the importance of healthcare as well. And so with the upcoming election on November 3rd, if you're voting in person, just ask that everyone make sure that they do so in the safest way possible. Make sure that you're wearing your mask, make sure that you're distancing as well. and we hope to see you at our next congressional meeting. And as a reminder, the commission will hold another virtual public hearing on November 19th. This time it'll be in the 3rd Congressional District. Registration to testify will be November 19th. For the November 19th hearing will be soon. However, individuals can submit comments. Leslie, I would recommend that you do that as well to the commission at any point using the public input form on our wisconsin.gov /peoplesmaps.com. This evening, hearing is now adjourned. Thank you again to everyone, and I'll see you upcoming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Ford.
Thank you.
Thank you.